2022 has seen some absolutely massive cyber attacks, but I do think that we can all agree that 2021 was a nightmare for cybersecurity. From the fallout of the SolarWinds attack starting to really coalesce at the beginning of 2021 to Log4j at the end of the year to multiple ransomware outbreaks and the other vulnerabilities and hacks that happened, it was just a real mess through and through all year long. Yeah, 2021 kind of stunk, but we did learn a lot about the cybersecurity industry as a whole, and we're going to talk about the top vulnerabilities that were exploited last year in 2021. We're going to talk about the biggest exploits, we're going to talk about what they did, we're going to talk about their impact, and we're going to talk about how you can protect yourself and your organization. Before we dive in, there's a link down in the description to this document that we will be looking at. In a joint effort from agencies from all around the world, this article was produced on the top 15 vulnerabilities that were exploited in 2021. And don't for a moment think that just because we're talking about 2021 that this is all old news. A lot of these exploits are actually still being used today, and a lot of the vulnerabilities still do exist today and probably will for a long time to come. In fact, it wouldn't exactly be shocking to see some of these CVEs named again in a similar document published next year talking about 22's 15 most exploited vulnerabilities. The agencies that took part in this document include, wait for it, CISA, the NSA, the FBI, Australian Cybersecurity Centre, Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, New Zealand National Cybersecurity Centre, and the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. So plenty of brain power between all of them and plenty of insight into the industry as a whole. They combine that brain power and insight to create this list of the top 15 most exploited vulnerabilities in 2021. They do note at the beginning of the document that for most of these vulnerabilities, it took around 2 weeks for a proof of concept to be published either by attackers or by cybersecurity researchers, allowing further exploitation of these vulnerabilities to occur. What we can take away from that figure is that as soon as a new vulnerability is published, the clock is ticking, and it's ticking fast. Not just for the vendors to publish a patch for these vulnerabilities, but also for the organizations themselves, as soon as a patch is released, to implement that patch. Speaking as somebody that covered most of these vulnerabilities and exploits as they were happening last year on this channel, there's a few things that I want to point out. The first being that not all of these exploits really require a proof of concept. In the case of Log4j shell, it really required the attacker to input a malicious string. So it really wasn't so much a matter of creating a proof of concept so much as it was creating an automated script to scan websites that had a vulnerable version of Log4j and to find an input field and input the malicious string and hopefully get some sort of a favorable response back. We're going to talk about the true impact that had later. I also want to mention that last year we saw varied success with the rollout of patches for some of these vulnerabilities. In some cases, sure, patches came out fairly quickly and they did a good job patching the actual vulnerability itself. In other cases, the patches themselves included vulnerabilities, and in other cases, they outright failed to patch the vulnerability, and even then, some patches just didn't even get released, or they were greatly delayed. Finally, I want to point out that once these proof of concepts were released, attackers were then able to pivot and use those proof of concepts and automated attacks across the internet. That allowed them to have wide-ranging and wide-impacting success exploiting organizations that have these vulnerabilities. And while the scattershot method definitely doesn't work every single time, it definitely does give attackers wide levels of access that they can then deploy things like ransomware or exfiltrate data or maintain persistence on their target. Now let's get to this list. At the top of this list, both surprisingly and unsurprisingly, is Log4j shell. I say surprisingly because if I'm remembering correctly, it was really only the last few weeks of December, the end of 2021, that Log4j shell was released. And within those few weeks, Log4j shell climbed to the absolute top of this list. But I say unsurprisingly because looking at this exploit, it makes complete sense that it would have had such a wide impact surface and have been able to be successfully exploited so often. This exploit took advantage of a vulnerability in Log4j, which is a log management function in applications that run on Java. Unfortunately, what happened is Log4j wouldn't necessarily store logs as strings, but would instead interpret the logs themselves. So if an attacker were to input a malicious string, that string would be interpreted by the server and then executed. That led to remote code execution. And again, it did not require a complex proof of concept or anything like that. literally just a malicious string in most cases. So all the attacker had to do was create an automated script that would identify vulnerable versions of Log4j being run, and then basically just scan for an external facing input field that they could input a malicious string and then have that interpreted by the server. And of course, that would give them remote code execution. So pretty dangerous stuff. That happened fairly quickly and the exploits spread like wildfire. And because of the absolutely wide use of not only Java, but Log4j, many organizations across the world immediately went into damage control, trying to implement a patch for this vulnerability. Fortunately, patches were rolled out. They did themselves include their own vulnerabilities, however, those reduced in severity. Really, the main one was this specific CVE, which again is at the top of this list because it was absolutely crazy. Looking further down this table, we have, of course, ProxyShell and ProxyLogon. These vulnerabilities were devastating on their own, and one of the things that they point out in this documentation is that they could be chained together, and that would allow not just for remote code execution, but for privilege escalation and security feature evasion. These targeted Microsoft Exchange servers, which again, kind of similar to Java, is used by many organizations worldwide. This did, however, require a bit of a more complex proof of concept, and that's one of those things that keeps this below Log4j. But once that proof of concept was released, this was actually automated and used to a great effect by attackers worldwide. I do want to note that some of the most vulnerable organizations were organizations that had vulnerable versions of MS Exchange that were hosted on-prem. If you're an organization that was running MS Exchange on the cloud, it was likely patched, not vulnerable to these exploits. But these exploits did lead to ransomware outbreaks and other major cybersecurity events throughout the year as well. In fact, these exploits were such a problem that they not only cover one, but they cover 7 of the 15 available spots on this table, which is crazy. Some other widely used exploits on this list includes an exploit on Atlassian Confluence, which if you aren't aware, it's basically a content management and sharing system that's widely used by organizations for internal documentation. CVE 2021-26084 allowed for remote code execution on the back end of Confluence servers. Granted, in most instances, these servers were internal facing only. However, if say an attacker were able to gain access to that network using something like probably either Log4j or ProxyShell or ProxyLogon, then they could take advantage of this vulnerability and execute remote code. Another widely used exploit was the VMware vSphere exploit, or CVE 2021-21972. That also allowed for remote code execution. And I say this is also significant of note because VMware is used by a lot of organizations worldwide for their virtual machine management. There's several other exploits here in this list, but I'm going to let you go ahead and dig through this documentation on your own if any of that is important or interesting to you. And if you find something that's interesting to you, comment about it down below. So how can you protect yourself? This document actually lays out a ton of excellent steps that you can follow. Of note, those steps include patch management and removing end-of-life systems from your network, enabling effective identity and access management and multi-factor authentication, as well as enacting strong protective controls like network segmentation, as well as strong network monitoring and detection. Some of those steps are fairly easy to implement that you could probably implement today if you wanted to. Others are fairly difficult, and especially depending on the size of your organization will require a team or larger to be able to take care of these objectives. All of this underscores the massive need in the cybersecurity industry to get more professionals in the field to be able to help organizations tackle these problems. That not only includes the need for people to be interested in cybersecurity and to position themselves for success, but it also includes organizations not seeking unicorns in their hiring practices, and to pay cybersecurity professionals what they are worth. It's a complex challenge with many layers, not just technical, but also human and HR. It's difficult, and it's going to require a tremendous amount of effort, time, money, and work to be able to get all of this resolved, or at least close to resolved. And until we get to that point, we're likely to see a lot of cyber attacks and incidents into the future, similar to what we've talked about here. So let's not end things on a dark note. Let's lighten things up. Comment down below with your favorite musical instrument. And if you want more information on some of these vulnerabilities that we've covered on this channel, as well as some of the specific hacks that took place with these vulnerabilities, check out this playlist right here. It will have a lot of what you're looking for. And of course, hit that subscribe button because I will be covering more of those kinds of events here in the future on this channel. And by the way, just an admin note for a lot of you that are subscribed and have been around, the Cyber Monday show has its own channel right now. Be sure to check it out. Hit that subscribe button. For the next 4 episodes of the Cyber Monday show, I will be streaming it both on this channel and the Cyber Monday show. The replay will only be available on the Cyber Monday show. And after that 4th stream, it will only be streamed on the Cyber Monday show. So make sure that you've subscribed to that channel and you are there if you want to keep up with those podcasts. They're absolutely excellent. I highly recommend it no matter what phase of your career you're in. So with all that, I'll see you all next time. Bye.